Good afternoon, colleagues here and joining us virtually. We're really thrilled to welcome you back to another day in the CBE channel. And so if you joined us yesterday, again, welcome back. We're going to keep the conversation going. If you are just joining us today, we are thrilled you are here. I'm joined on the stage by some wonderful panelists to be able to talk about competency-based education and how EdTech can help accelerate the movement. A little bit about me, I'm Garrison Duncan. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Competency-Based Education Network, which is a group of individuals, institutions, organizations who believe that competency-based education is a way to provide more efficient and effective and employable learning and credentialing. So again, I'm joined by some folks on stage. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So Dick, would you start us off with introductions?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Dick Senese. I'm president of Capella University.
And I'm Linda Feng. I'm a principal software architect at Unicon, and we're helping the CBE network with competency-based education programs.
Hi, I'm Kate Valenti. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Unicon.
I'm Dr. Jeff Borden. I'm the Chief Academic Officer with D2L.
Thank you again for agreeing to join. So I would love to hear from each of you. We all came to CBE through some different paths, but again, found our way to it and now are strong advocates for it. So we'd love to hear from your perspective why CBE is important and how your organization thinks about competency-based education.
Well, at Capella University, all of our curriculum is competency-based. Capella works mainly and historically with working adults who are going back to get an education, either to advance in their career. So for us, we wanted to find a way and a curriculum model that was relevant, that could be affordable and could be flexible. So competency-based education, even in the traditional online format of weekly assignments and all those things, satisfies that. And then we've taken that to a bit of a next level by really leaning into the direct assessment regulations in what we call FlexPath. And we have a number of programs that are offered in the FlexPath format now, and 17,000 alumni of FlexPath, so I'm proud to say that.
All right, and as an architect at Unicon, I have actually spent probably the vast majority of my career worrying about student data and student data exchange. And about a month ago, I attended the IMS Global Learning Consortium annual Digital Credential Summit. I've been involved in the IMS for many years, primarily around rostering and grade passback standards and working with the EdTech community around that. But what I found really compelling when I was at the Digital Credential Summit was hearing just about kind of the big problem of employers need talent and people need jobs, and yet I think it's like almost half of job openings today are going unfilled. I think there's another statistic that's really scary, which is, or alarming, I should say. There are over 35 million people who have some college but no degree. And so I think there is a big need to try to serve those folks who are looking to match up, really, those folks who are looking for jobs with the jobs that need to be filled.
And I'll extend to that, coming from the same organization, but we come to CBE through our customers who are really looking at how are we serving our learners in a different way. And I look at it as a supply and demand situation where I think learners are having a moment here and they're saying that the way that you're serving me isn't serving me anymore. And you need to find new and different ways to do that. And so that's what we try to help customers through is how do we take the traditional way that we've served these learners, how do we understand what their new needs are, and how do we respond to those needs so that they continue to find value in the services that we provide.
I think the first time that I really heard in depth about CBE, I was sitting across from Arnie Duncan, for those of you that remember that particular Secretary of Education. And he was saying that it will be, in 10 years, the predominant delivery method for higher education. Well, that was in 2010. So obviously, there are a lot of barriers, there are a lot of difficulties, there's hurdles. That was when I was with a different LMS company. I was with eCollege back in the day, for those of you that remember that platform. I went off and went to a university as their chief innovation officer, and during that time, D2L started building out an actual competency platform. So when I came back into the D2L ecosystem about a year ago, we now have arguably some of the biggest competency-based programs in the world are using our platform because it actually has the ability to measure proficiency and mastery and really get at learning rather than the proxies for learning that we always use. So from our perspective, it's all about the whole learner and measuring what actually matters, not just what's easy. So that's the approach we take.
Great. Thank you all. And I did not prompt them on that, but you can hear a common theme of centering learners, what learners need, what employers need. And so thank you for sharing that. So my first question is for you, Dick. I would love to hear, Capella has been a leader. You talked about what differentiates you. Thinking about direct assessment, can you help everyone level set about, again, how you define CBE for a direct assessment program?
Sure. So we use the definition of competencies that it has 3 subparts: knowledge, skills, and professional dispositions. And then in the direct assessment program, what we do is we offer learners the opportunity to demonstrate their competencies. And as they can, in the FlexPath program, a little bit similar to Guided Path. And they have a 12-week period where they can be concurrently registered for up to 2 courses. The first thing you do when you register in a FlexPath course is you decide what your calendar is. During this 12 weeks, when am I going to complete these 4 assessments, for example? Now, behind those assessments are competencies and criteria for competencies that we use a model we call the fully embedded assessment model. So competencies appear multiple times. Maybe in a program there's 35 competencies. They will appear multiple times in multiple courses using different criteria. And criteria might look different like context, right? Like, can you read a balance sheet? Can you read a balance sheet in an accounting course? Can you read a balance sheet in a leadership course and explain something to a board of directors? I'm not an accountant, I'm a psychologist, so I might not be the best example. But you get the idea that it's never one and done, and we use 4 levels of rating. And learners have to demonstrate mastery of the competencies. So you have to master all competencies in the program to be awarded the degree. And for us, as we think about technology and what does that mean, we need platforms and student record systems that can really help track all of that. We use some proprietary systems now to help us with the course build and other things, but that's how our direct assessment model works in a very short minute or 2. But we've had to, we started about 8 years ago, I think, and we've had to really, bubble gum and baling wire and getting systems that don't talk to each other. We have to figure out how they can talk to each other, or, my God, changing a program in the old SIS system was a nightmare. So all these things rely on technology platforms if we're really going to scale it.
Thank you, and thanks for sharing that succinct way of thinking about direct assessment. Again, sounds really different from probably how most of us went through our education. And then drawing us back to, I keep hearing about the technology solutions, bubblegum, duct tape, rope, and tie strings, right? And just trying to piece these things together, and that at the end of the day, too, interoperability is a huge issue between systems. So, Kate, I'm going to come to you, because I know, again, you've been helping us think through what is the tech stack, the types of solutions that have to exist across the entire enterprise. There's not one solution, as Dick mentioned. We're really trying to piece it together. So can you tell us how to conceptually think about a tech stack for a CBE program?
Absolutely, and I think that's critical to start with the thought of there isn't one solution and there never will be. So this is not a tech solution that's going to get a system. And I don't have visual aids here, so I'm going to ask everybody to sort of do their mental model. We're going to start with the learner in the center, as we like to do, and we're going to think about the learning environment first. So there's an environment in which the learner is experiencing learning, the teaching and learning is taking place. That can be a learning management system, a courseware platform, a dozen courseware platforms. Hopefully that's a well-integrated system that the learner is experiencing. And in quality CBE, that learning environment is personalized, potentially adaptive, just depending on how good it is. And that learning environment is likely integrated with lots of other systems inside the institution. So student information system, financial aid, advising, portfolio, you've got a whole host of things kind of in that central piece. If you draw a concentric circle kind of out from that center, you're really talking about what are the components that you need in place in order to manage CBE as a program. So you have competency management. What are our competencies? What level of granularity are we going to define for each of those competencies? How do we manage that? And then we're going to do the sister to competency management, which is assessment management. So on the other side, how are we going to measure, and how are we going to measure mastery? And then also inside that circle, I like to think about the learner achievement at the end. How are we going to capture and persist the outcomes from that? So what does the evidence portfolio look like that allows us to bring those things together? So you've got learning environment, a step out from that, competency management, assessment management, evidence portfolio. If you go one more step out from there, you're really talking about data infrastructure, and Dick talked about this. I mean, data is such a critical component to these technical environments. It is the thing that feeds personalization and adaptivity. It is the thing that allows us to look at, the evidence-based quality of the program itself in a full loop to make sure that we're doing the things that we think we're doing with the competencies and the way they're being measured. It's also the thing that feeds student support. So another critical component of quality CBE is making sure that there is that regular interaction between an instructor, facilitator, student support, and the learner. And that data infrastructure is the thing that allows us to surface insights to those individuals just in time so that those learners are serviced in the best way. So if you kind of think about the bullseye that I drew, those are the components, kind of conceptual components to an architecture.
I might add, one of the other great benefits of having the right data architecture is to be able to measure and test innovation, right? Because we've all met with lots of vendors if you're in higher ed today, and many of you probably have ed startups and all that. But how do we know it works, right? And how can we measure it? And as an educational psychologist, counseling psychologist, I believe that innovation has to be married to that. And having the right data architecture behind CBE then allows us to really test whether or not something works or not with various subpopulations of learners.
Absolutely. I think a key piece here is, again, getting to a conversation around equity in this, and something that I know that several of us have talked about is you start with that, again, that learner and their persona and what they're going to need, and then build out. And so those interactions could look different based on the learning environment, based on, again, the types of supports I might need, whether that's childcare subsidies or thinking about food sustainability. So, Kate, I know we talked a little bit about even that interoperability, maybe moving a little bit outside the institution. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So, I've got my first bullseye here, but obviously you've got all sorts of different consumers or even inputs into that. So workforce is a huge one that obviously we should talk about. I mean, workforce both as a recipient of the folks who are going through this environment, but also an entry point into what competencies are we talking about? So are the things that we're teaching people to do the things that the workforce needs? Amber, I think it's a great point in that we put the learner in the center, but the learner is not one universal person, right? There are lots of different types of learners with different needs, depending on where they're coming from, what they're trying to achieve throughout the skills, whether they're just in a job and they're trying to expand their opportunity within that role, whether they're trying to get a job. So lots of different ways to look at that learner in the center, and you sort of have to look at lots of different types of learners to really understand what are all of the components that then get filled into those circles in the ecosystem to understand what systems do we need in order to feed in and integrate and interoperate.
Thank you. So my next question is really for all of you. So now that we've talked about, again, this tech stack and identity, the idea that there are multiple solutions needed, what advice do you have for people who are building technology to be able to think about where do I fit in the stack? How do I start to understand what's needed by this community that's trying to scale? Oh, Jeff, you want to?
Okay, yeah, I'll start. I was just going to say, I think Kate's description of the bullseye diagram also makes me think of a cinnamon roll. It's like a cinnamon roll with the learner as the meaty, juicy part in the middle. So if you think about I guess this, and I like to think of the cinnamon roll. Maybe it's because I need my afternoon snack. Think of taking a slice out of the cinnamon roll and kind of start with almost like a way to take maybe one set of competencies and one set of assessments that is based on, that measures those competencies, and then build data infrastructure in a more or less MVP way to manage and be able to track the activity which is happening with that learner. This can help you figure out where your hurdles are and ensure that as an organization you know how to manage building this at scale. So being able to do that one slice allows you to start small and fail fast. And some good examples of where I'm seeing this right now, there's a project in North Dakota where they are mapping the competencies for the cybersecurity track. So that's one good example where if they're focused on that one set of competencies and going down to a level of granularity, they can start to have the conversations and really work out down to what level makes sense and how should assessment work for the different levels, which I think is a really good place to start.
I think I would add to that, so I'll just throw out yet another metaphor since that's what we're doing. I go with 3D chess, perhaps. So there's a lot of things that are happening in parallel to other things that need to happen. So we've talked about the learner. Well, we know that the whole learner is not just about the academic learner, right? So there are other things that schools have to pay attention to. Do students feel that they have networks and relationships and support? About a third of students will drop out if they don't have those things. And it has nothing to do with the academics. It just has to do with the fact that they're lonely or sad. You've got the cognitive learner. You've got the learner that has mindset and grit and tenacity and resilience, those first and family learners. So those are happening in parallel. If you want to look at it like a matrix, those things are happening perhaps above what's going on with regard to competencies. So for competencies, I think then you have to have, just like you have an architect, a systems thinking person, for those of you that like Peter Senge's book, The Fifth Discipline, you've got to have somebody who's got their eye on the entire puzzle to be able to say, this is how the pieces fit together, whether that's one single person or a team. You've got to have people who are checking in regularly and saying, you've heard up here mapping, you keep hearing mapping. Well, you've got to have pretty good maps of your curriculum. So where do, and I love what we heard that Capella is doing with regard to checking in multiple times across the program. I think anyone who's been in higher ed for any length of time knows there's not a lot of connection. There's a lot of silos, not just departmentally, but even from course to course to course. There are a lot of professors that don't know what the other professor across the hall is teaching or ever will teach. And so they don't know if they're reinforcing what's been said or vice versa. Well, that has to change. So there are processes that really do require some sort of systematic architecture, whether, again, that's a person or a group, to make this really move.
And I think one of the things that is really important to keep in mind, I love a cinnamon roll, but I'm going to use the bullseye. Where you have a learning environment, you have an assessing environment, and you have the business of higher ed, like bursars and registers. But just let's talk about the learning environment for a second. If you're in online education and you're a learner, every course looks the same. Every instructor looks the same because you don't really even see them, right? So we really have to find ways to scale relationships, real authentic relationships. We have to decrease the interpersonal distance between faculty and advisors and that learner, right? And then we have to find ways that motivate learners, whether it's like through gamification or, my provost and I were talking with a vendor and we said, well, is it gamified? Can the person track themselves? And they're like, yeah, we're working on the green check boxes, right? But that's a really important thing. So the learner knows. And then novelty is really important. We know this from everything we know in cognitive psychology. Novelty is important, right? People attend to novel stimuli. So how do you change it up? Like, not every course has a discussion every Sunday night or something, because, oh my goodness, it's the only laugh line I get in my commencement speech, right? Because it's just too much. So technology that also understands learning and uses learning science and psychometrics behind it, that's what I look for. I know whenever I meet with vendors, the questions I ask really are secretly about those three topics.
Yeah, I'll just add to anyone in the room who comes from the product side rather than from the institution side. I mean, I would just really like products to think about themselves in the context of the bullseye, the ecosystem. There are fabulous adaptive platforms out there that don't receive or emit any data from anywhere else. And that's great for that product, but the reality of the systems that we're putting together is that that just doesn't work in this environment. You need to be able to receive the information and you need to emit it. And you need to think about how what you're doing inside of your platform can feed things like a dashboard where a learner can see how they're progressing against competencies, because that spells for quality for us. So, you know, thinking about not just the product, but how it lives within the context of the other components.
And what the learner experience is, right? You know, like a simple example is everything has to be single sign-on. Like, I'm not going to send my learners to 5 platforms. If they can't sign on to it once, sign in once, they aren't going to go there and use it anyway. You know, so we have to do that. And then the data is so important to be able to get data back in a way that we can use it in our data systems through the interoperability work. I mean, the IMS global work is so important because it establishes these interoperability standards, and we all have to use and adopt those.
So this wasn't on my list, but it's one of the things that I want to harp on is interoperability, just because. So you've talked about IMS Global. What data standards, what open data standards do you think are most critical to be looking at in that bullseye? Maybe you can share your perspectives on that.
I'm going to ask Linda to share her perspective on that.
Yeah. So I think, you know, one of the fundamental, I kind of think of the standards in through a couple different lenses. I think, you know, when we think about, we need to get to a fundamental unit of how do you describe the actual unit of learning, and you know, conceptually, it's you can think of it as a form of currency, right? So I often say, like, are we architecting, you know, kind of like Alexander Hamilton, right, when he was inventing money? So standards like IMS has been working for a while on sort of the backbone, which is CASE, so that can help us at least describe those academic standards and their relationship to each other. This is work that ultimately is, you know, once you define this currency, you then have to figure out, you know, what things, I guess, you know, how do you want to price something, and then you have to figure out, you know, where you're going to have point of sale machines. So there's a whole ecosystem that needs to evolve with different products that support this fundamental unit of currency, and at the moment, you know, CASE is a good way for us to kind of use that common framework. On top of that, I think where groups are now headed is, you know, we've thought of the transcript for a long time for course-based, you know, evidence of learning, but there's the idea of this comprehensive learner record. Now, actually, IEEE has taken over a good effort to it's called the ILR, the Integrated Learner Record, and it's part of kind of a subset of a larger initiative, which is around the learner and employment record. So these kinds of standards will enable us to then have that mobility across universities and between states, you know, for learners who are earning both work that they do within a university, but also co-curricular types of work that can all be rolled together into a single common record. So those are really good standards, and I'll also just kind of put in a plug that much of the data today, you know, that is about the system of record about a student kind of tends to be locked up inside of SISs that have been used at universities and implemented almost like decades ago. So there's a lot to be done to unlock that data, and there's a new standard that's being worked on within IMS called the Edu API, which is really just, the whole idea is because we have APIs, we can help vendors expose more of the inputs and outputs for their product, but we need a conduit, and we need that language to be kind of the what is a student and what is a course, and what have they been doing with their enrollment and learner activity.
Can I add a little bit to that? So in terms of those APIs, I'm so glad you said that. For the longest time, the LTI world, it just didn't get us far enough. In fact, you could almost argue it started hurting us as much as it helped us in the beginning. Those APIs are so important, and most organizations these days are using some kind of service bus, an enterprise service bus. You've all heard of I think the MuleSofts of the world if you're in technology or products. There are higher ed versions of things like that. There's the Flow product from Pathify and those sorts of things that allow you to take all of your systems and plug and play them, connect them, which then allows you to take data, any data point from any system, and compare, contrast, correlate, whatever you'd like, from any other data point from any other system. And that's not uncommon in much of the world. It's highly uncommon in higher education. So we need to, I know we've got legacy systems that we're trying to overcome, and there's a lot of IT staff who are really struggling because of baggage, tech debt. But the more we can get into these similar environments to what we're seeing outside of higher ed, we will have much better and more access to data.
Well, and I think one of the problems, related to this is, as a president of an institution, I want a way to do it that is both, it works, it's stable, and I'm not going to have to redo it in 5 years, right? So having, now I expose myself as a bad accountant, now a bad information architect, there has to be some kind of middleware of some kind that these things feed into. And for traditional institutions of higher education, gaining the capital to invest in redoing a system is really hard. It's that capital expenditure too. And I don't have the answer to that for sure, but that's a big barrier if I think about my colleagues who run traditional public or traditional small private institutions. How do they invest in that kind of architecture? And so higher ed has to get away from the build it yourself into the buy it space by and large, but that buying it comes with challenges as well.
And I would just plug that in the K-12 space, Project Unicorn has been a huge effort, actually probably further ahead from the post-secondary space, just because you all have been trying to do this in K-12 between districts and sharing among schools and districts. And so I think you start to see, again, data standards being the way that we say, okay, we're going to at least publish our information in a way that can be shared. There's still a lot of sense making to do, but even again, sharing within an institution, right? You hear that duct tape a piece. So there's all that to say there's a lot of good work happening, but also that would encourage you to get involved, whether you're an ed tech person or if you're a practitioner, because if we don't have you directing this, people are going to build things that we don't need and that maybe aren't interoperable. And so be demanding that of your systems. And there's conversations through the T3 Innovation Network at the U.S. Chamber Foundation. Jeannie Kitches is here from Credential Engine. There's, again, Project Unicorn. So finding who's doing open data standards, interoperability in your space, and cheer them on or help them see what you need. It's really important. So my next question, though, now we dove deep in technology and data, let's come back up to the learner. And we know that there's a time for tech and there's a time for face-to-face. And so in CBE, how do we make that distinction between that? How do we make sure we're preserving those human connections? You talked about relationships being important. This isn't just leaving learners to be on their own and learn by themselves. It is an engaging learning experience. So how does technology help do that? And maybe when does it point us in the right direction for when those relationships really have to be solid?
I would go back again to that sort of holistic, the learning triangle is what it used to be called. I think some people still use that. That talk about, the student learner, the connected learner, and the mindset learner. There are absolutely ways that digital technologies can help bridge those connections. You really need, in 2022, you really should have a digital campus, not just a digital classroom. And so that is how you can start to see whether it's a face-to-face student or an online student connecting with other people through nudges and through those recommended, hey, did you know about this group over here? Did you know about this person? Did you know about this piece of content that you've never seen before? Obviously, you can do those things in a digital classroom, but when you start doing that across the campus, when you get people to the financial aid office when they need it, when the student raises their hand, whether it's face-to-face or online, and says, I can't register, and someone from the registrar's office goes, oh, I got this, I can help them. There are systems that do that today. But again, they need to be stitched together and integrated so that you're able to launch from there into the places of productivity that you need, just like you can launch into the places of connection that you need.
You know, just to jump on my bandwagon here about decreasing that interpersonal distance. You have to find a way to do that, and you have to do it with a growth mindset. Those nudges, how are they worded? Have you done A/B testing on the language you're using? All of these things matter because even if that student never sees a person actually face-to-face, they do in their mind. Right? We have a very fancy word in psychology, cathexis, that talks about this. The connection they're making. They have an image of that faculty member. They have an image of the advisor, whether they've met them or not. So all of that matters. The colors on the UI, all of it matters. And we have the ability to test those things, and we really should take advantage of that and always be looking at this from the outside in. Never from the inside out, always from the learner's perspective. What's it like to be that learner who at 11 p.m. got home, finally got the kids to bed, finished the work they promised to do for the local garden club or their local soccer team or whatever, and now they're going to study for 45 minutes or an hour, right? Or how can we make it possible for them to get the information they need while they're waiting during a softball game for their kid or something, right? Because if you do that, it sends a signal. It says, yeah, we got you. We understand who you are. I see you. And you do all of that, and you don't even have to be face-to-face. But you have to send that message all the time. And we have a ways to go, don't get me wrong. We have a ways to go on this, but that's the kind of aspirational goal we have.
Okay, just as a quick example, for those of you in the room, you may, in a year, if someone were to say to you, what do you remember about President Senese? You may say the Flamingo Socks, right? Those of you online probably can't see them, but it depends what matters to you in that moment, right? What matters to you at that time, and sometimes it's friendships, and sometimes it's academics, and sometimes it's getting a job, and being able to understand, and sometimes it's flamingos. That's right.
We always think about technology as the way to scale programs like this, to take the work that is not worth an instructor's time and do it offline for them. So this is not replacing instructors. This is not replacing faculty. It's not replacing teaching. It's enhancing it. It's enabling it. So if I'm supporting students with data that is helping me to meet them where they are, to understand what they need. And that crunching of the data, that looking through and drawing out insights of what is it that this learner needs is being done behind the scenes in technology that I don't need to be spending time doing. But it's putting into my hands the information that I need to better support as a human being to another human being. So I always think about the tech play here as it's the scaling, it's the offloading of the processing work that allows the human to better interact with the human by not wasting their time with the things that they don't need to be doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not a psychologist, but I think there's a fundamental human need to be aware of oneself, to observe oneself, and so just the idea that technology can help us see what we're doing, and then that can enable us to make better choices about what we're going to do next. You can see, even just as a baby, like they are fascinated by looking in the mirror. So I think there are moments. I think yesterday on this panel or on this stage, someone mentioned universal learning for design or universal design for learning, and the idea that you want to give students choice. That's another thing that technology can enable, and if you emphasize routes that students can take to reach their goals in different ways that meet their needs or that satisfy their modalities, the ways that they learn best. In fact, this is another example. My son, picked up a book, and he's been reading the book, but he also discovered that he can get it on Audible, and he's like, actually, I can read it better if I'm listening to it and I'm like looking at the words at the same time, versus one or the other. So people want to consume their lessons in lots of different ways, but giving that choice is really important.
Awesome. So my last question, and then there should be time, so get your questions ready. My last question is, you brought up a little over 10 years ago, it was like, this is going to be the thing, and it is education that's on the edge of mass adoption. We are losing the sands of time. So if you had a magic wand, though, just real quickly, what's one thing you would do to scale this so that in 5 years we say mass adoption? Just one thing, just because we only have 4 minutes.
I know, I was going to say, I think you can throw a dart and you could hit something that needs to be invested in the ecosystem. I'll start, and it won't shock anybody. I mean, data infrastructure for me is really the answer. It's a critical component here. So creating a wildly interoperable platform that is able to both receive and emit information to feed personalization, adaptation, insights, I think is critical to solving this.
I guess I would say start creating those maps. That's going to get you a long way, because the technology can just come alongside that and then help you enable, as you were saying, people to do their best work.
I think finding a way to scale support so the learner feels like they're seen, even though it's in a distance environment.
Yeah, and I think for me, I agree with what everyone here else has said, but I think that idea of finding that common unit of currency is fundamental and kind of needs to be honed. We need more conversations just around, what are, do we like using the CLR or the ILR, and what's missing, and let's see some examples of where there's going to be more adoption in the market.
Cool. All right, we have time for one question. Don't all raise your hands at once. Okay, right here. It is a lot of pressure, sorry.
So, just think about this. I'm going to say something, and just emotively, what comes out. Ready? I got a 36 on the ACT. Me, Frank. I got a 36. Okay? Ready? I'm going to say something different. I got a 15 on the ACT. There's an emotional connection to that composite score. We still see education. It doesn't matter if you talk about, K through 12 or higher ed. We are sorting kids and we are sorting adults, and that composite value is used to make a determination of whether, we'll give you some money to go to school, or we won't give you some money to go to school, or I'll let you into this class, or I won't let you into that class. Now, what's more meaningful and valuable to me and to my daughter and to my son is, okay, here's the math you know, and here's the math you don't know. Here's the math you used to know, but you forgot it, but it's still on the shelf. Pull it off, pull it off the shelf and go over it again. That diagnostic is really what I'm looking for. And not the diagnostic to sort the kid, or to sort me, or to sort them, so that they can help themselves. Now they're making refrigerators, I tell you. You're low on mayonnaise, or you got 5 ketchup bottles in there. That's great. Now I know not what to buy.
Yep.
And so if we're getting to that place with consumer products, why can't we get there with knowledge and let, you had this Redbox experience in the mid-2000s, where there's no more Blockbuster, there's no more Hollywood Video. It's a disintermediated affair now. You want a movie? Go to Circle K, it's right there. Now, it's not even that. You can do it from home. You can just order it on HBO Max or Hulu or
So that is time on our session. The next session starts right now, and so if you need to leave, please. No, I think that there are many things to answer that question, but there was just a report out on the ACT and SAT scores that, and then looking at people's course taking, the volume of courses in AP, and guess what? None of that matches up. And that's what happens when we use proxies for learning and we don't shift to competencies, as we've just said, how we understand what people are coming in with, and we're here to add value. We're not here to judge. If you heard the students on the panel yesterday, it was about how do we get you to the next place, to that next mastery of what you need. So I think that's what, sorry, I spoke for everybody, but I think that's our movement, right? That's where what we're doing, where we want to have more of that happening. So thank you for the question. We can definitely continue the conversation. Thank you all for being here.